The first red alert may be over, but the battle against the hazardous haze is not. Joining me in the studio to talk more about this is Jennifer Turner. She's the director of the China Environment Forum at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Our introduction, well, the smog is gone, but the smog is coming back. It's this good news, bad news. In Wang Wei's report, she was talking about 58 down to 37. I'm sure if you're breathing it, that's still not going to cut it, but there has been a reduction.
No, there definitely has, and we've heard reports both from Greenpeace and Chinese researchers saying that since over the last year, I mean, coal use has dropped, but that PM 2.5 levels overall in China have dropped something like 16%, which is good. I mean, this is the kind of trend you want to see, but at the same time, you have days and days of this gray sky, and it wasn't just this week, it was last week, and evidently last week, the air quality levels were much higher than the week of the red code. And
well, let me ask you about the red alert, because some people are saying exactly what you're saying. Well, at least the government stepped up, said, hey, look, we've got a problem, there's a red alert, and tried to take steps. And some are seeing that as a positive sign.
No, it is. I mean, when you think from back in 2012, when the government wasn't even measuring PM 2.5, they didn't have targets, they weren't measuring it, and the U.S. Embassy was tweeting out the levels of how bad the air really was. Citizens took their own measurements, and that was kind of an embarrassing situation. So now the government, there is much more transparency on the air quality, but there's still, I think, some confusion when last week levels were much higher, and it took, citizens complained. A researcher at Beijing University wrote an article, why don't we have code red? And I think that that's also a positive sign. The public speaks out, and then the government reacts. But it doesn't, I think, promote a lot of confidence in people in the coding system, but live and learn, right?
Well, let me ask you about the interconnectivity of all of this, because I was in China a couple of years ago, and I remember getting on a train. You see pollution, and then you go a distance, and you still look out your window, and you still see pollution. There's a lot of pollution.
There's a lot of pollution.
You can shut down your coal factory in Beijing, but that doesn't guarantee that the person in the province next over is going to do the same thing, and it's going to get to you at some point. So talk to me about, cooperating with one another, one province dealing with another. This is complicated.
It is complicated, but because of, we had the smog crises and the government had their pollution action plan, the war against pollution, China now has these regional coal control plans. Around Beijing, there's like 5 provinces, and that they have a set target when they're going to have to meet, dropping down like 50% of their coal consumption. And Beijing and Guangzhou are both saying, we're going to meet it 10 years before the government wants us to, because it's quite desperate. So they're kind of coordinating their measurements. But we're talking coal right here, but this most recent red alert really wasn't just driven by coal, it was driven by the cars.
Absolutely, and you got a lot of people in a lot of cars. Let me ask you about this. We've got all these people meeting in Paris. You look at China, and China is really kind of out in front when it comes to solar, wind. I mean, it's just basically the foot on the pedal. And yet we still have this base load consumption, and this is an issue every country's dealing with, and a lot of them rely on coal, because you can get the coal plant up and going, and wind you can't rely on it all the time, solar the same. Is this a conundrum?
I mean, it definitely is a conundrum. I mean, but that said, we're really seeing an encouraging trend where coal consumption is starting to drop. But the car issue, I think that now with this most recent, I guess, kind of embarrassment with the government, but with the air pollution, maybe this will have them speed up, dare I use another pun about cars, fuel efficiency standards, but also trucks. I don't know if you ever, in midday here in DC, check Beijing's air quality index, and you'll see what's middle of the night there, the air quality is getting worse because all those big trucks that are burning diesel are coming in the city. And same thing about Beijing, though, in terms of good steps. I mean, they have huge subway system, natural gas cars and buses, but it's not enough.
There's no magic bullet, but if you were to get on the phone and say, I think you should take this step, what step would it be?
Well, I mean, in some ways, they are doing a lot of it, but I think that the question is still that there's not always sufficient transparency about, sometimes how bad the air really is. I mean, they hesitated last week. I mean, had they acted last week with these measures, we might have seen a much quicker drop. But it's a short-term solution, and it did probably protect the health of some of the more vulnerable groups in the short term, but it's a tough one.
One final question before you take off. Jennifer, I have to ask you, all of this news, all of this concentration of interest on China, the smog, what we've seen this week, how much do you think that is helping what's going on in Paris? in terms of coming up with a deal, a legitimate deal?
Well, I think that in some ways it's, dare I say, like the smog is breathing down the backs of the Chinese climate negotiators, because that is a huge impetus for them to make concrete commitments and see through with them, because it's the local air pollution issue that's really, I mean, it's a political hazard for the government, and they need to act.
Jennifer Turner, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.